Okay, thank you so much, Mara. Welcome, everyone. I shared in the chat, but can share again. I see people are in the document, which is great. I'm going to go ahead and just reshare. I know people are joining. I'm going to share the link to the Google document. The doc will be accessible while we're in class together, and then it will become private afterwards. So if you do want a copy of it, I also put my email in the chat. And I think actually Mara will send out a copy, a PDF after. I want to mention relatedly, and you'll see I'm putting my email in the chat again, since I know many people are joining. I do not see the chat while I'm sharing some thoughts with you while we're going through text. I think the chat is helpful for everyone to see each other's comments and to be able to have the chance to share a thought or a question. But know that I will pause in between sections for one or two questions. And if you don't get to ask your question, I will, you're welcome to email me, and I just ask you for a few days time in order for me to get back to you. Okay, so I'm also going to go ahead and share my screen in case that's helpful for some people. Okay, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Okay. I'm adjusting my screen so I can see as many people as I can. So you'll see that I'm going to look at you and the camera as much as I can as I'm talking, but my second monitor is kind of behind and a little bit above. So you'll see I will kind of look up sometimes and switch back and forth between looking at you and looking up. Okay, so you're welcome, of course, to scroll through the document during a few minutes of an intro. I want to share a few things with you about Pirkei Avot, which is often translated as Ethics of the Fathers or Chapters of the Fathers. It's a rabbinic document from about the year 200. It is traditional for us to study this document between Passover and Shavuot. And actually, I think it's a pretty radical notion that the rabbis are expressing when they suggested that we study this material, because the material is, I would say, primarily interpersonal based, meaning it's all about, in addition to intrapersonal, working on ourselves, really working on ourselves for the sake of community and our relationships with other people. And there are other ideas that we'll see too, many ideas related to Torah and Jewish observance, of mitzvot, of commandments, of Jewish practice. But the primary gestalt of the document of Pirkei Avot is really about ethics and relationships. And so in this time period between Passover and Shavuot, traditionally the way we think of it, the time period between the Israelites exiting out of Egypt, the Exodus, and Shavuot is considered the time period in just a few weeks where the Israelites received the Torah. And so when the rabbis say we should be reading Pirkei Avot between Passover and Shavuot, I think they're really suggesting that when we think about Torah, we should be thinking of Torah as a core ethical teaching. Certainly there are rituals that the Torah asks of us also, but since Pirkei Avot is primarily ethically based, interpersonally based, the rabbis, I think, are making a pretty radical suggestion and asking us to take a look at it during this time. The other interesting thing about Pirkei Avot is traditionally there are 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, and there are 6, I think, chapters of Pirkei Avot. Often one chapter a week is studied. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I actually forgot. You can email me if you want. I forget if it's I didn't double check, and you'll see why in a moment. There's 7 chapters or there's something else that's added at the end for our 7th week. It's escaping me. The details are escaping me. If, again, you're welcome to email me. But the way that I like to study Pirkei Avot and the way that we're going to study it together over the next few weeks, I think is a much more effective way of exploring the miscellaneous, the very, very varied text with different kinds of themes. So today, what we'll do is I've pulled texts here, which was a long process and fun in the end. I've pulled texts that speak in an organized way to what it means to live a life of ethics, to work on ourselves, and again, work on ourselves for the sake of being in community with others. So that will be our focus today. And I think next week, I'm sort of still deciding, but next week, I think our focus will be on what it means to be a learner, what it means, what the rabbis are suggesting about learning and how that connects to our attributes in general. And I think the 3rd week will be a little bit of a focus on forgiveness in Pirkei Avot and other texts also. So to give you a preview, if you haven't already scrolled, we will be starting with texts that speak to, again, ourselves, the intrapersonal, and then shifting a little bit to texts that help us move outward, focused on community. And in a 3rd section, we're going to take that a few steps further, thinking about, I would say, tier 2, the next level of what it means to interact with others. And I'm hoping we can get to the kind of meta section. I don't know if we'll be able to go through all the texts here, but you'll have them as a reference point, and we'll end with a few. And I also added 2 texts at the end that I think are worth tying in. So I'm hoping I'll have a few minutes at the end to tie in these texts. So before I dive in to the first section here, I am going to pause for just 1 or 2 reflections or questions, and I'll do the same after each section. So if anybody would like to ask a general question based on what I've shared so far or what you see, please go ahead and either raise your hand or I see Arnold's block, so I'm going to go ahead and Mara, can I unmute someone?
Yes, but I'm also here,
okay.
So.
Okay, fine. So I'll let you do that. Thank you. Okay. Hi Arnold's block. Welcome.
Hi. I just have when you say this was written by the rabbis in around 200 AD, were these rabbis living in Babylonia, in Israel?
Roman Palestine, the land of Israel. Yes, they were living. Thank you for asking. This document, and the word document is kind of a funny word to use because it's essentially it conjures up, at least for me, it conjures up a very modern notion. But actually, the Pirkei Avot was part of a document called the Mishnah, which is mostly ritually legalistic, meaning some of you might know already, the Mishnah is a collection of laws and legal opinions and legal differences among the rabbis in many different subject areas across the spectrum of Jewish practice, divided into 6 sections. Definitely, if you haven't heard of the Mishnah yet, I definitely suggest reading about it, Googling it. Pirkei Avot was probably written separately, but attached to the Mishnah. And it is now part of the Mishnah. So if you look up the Mishnah, or if you have a paper copy of the Mishnah, Pirkei Avot is one of the many tractates or subsections of the Mishnah. So thank you for asking that. One more reflection or question before we begin. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I may ask others to volunteer to read, but I'm going to go ahead and start. And so what you'll see in front of you is 3 texts and a 4th modern one that speak to one of the many things, or a few of the many things that the rabbis are suggesting in becoming a grounded person in order to be a positive functioning member of community. And the rabbis start with silence. Offense to wisdom is silence. In Hebrew, siyag lechokhma shtika. I think what the rabbis are saying here is that in order to attain wisdom, we need a pathway to that. And that doesn't necessarily involve talking, even though I'm talking right now. It involves listening and getting quiet and getting to know ourselves and getting to know the wisdom of others. And silence is a starting point. And often some of these things you'll hear are modern, seem like modern ideas, or certainly cross-cultural ideas. And one of the most famous lines in rabbinic tradition, I think, I'll read it in Hebrew first, is Im ein kemach ein Torah, im ein Torah ein kemach. Where there is no bread or flour, there is no Torah. Where there is no Torah, there is no bread or flour. Meaning the ancient rabbis in the lands of Israel wanted, they're really speaking to themselves, but I'll speak in a larger we. They wanted us to know that you have to balance the study of Torah and the pursuit of wisdom. You can't be a person that neglects your self-care, neglects being able to support yourself. The pursuit of wisdom has to go hand in hand with taking care of yourself and your needs. Many people here have probably heard of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a triangle, where the bottom of the triangle is the basics of living a life self-supporting, having food, water, clothing, shelter. Same idea here from a couple thousand years ago. It starts with basic self-care. And a very popular modern idea, Ezehu Ashir, who is rich, Hasameach bechalko, someone that rejoices, that is happy with his or her portion in life. As it says, the rabbis often quote a biblical text to support what they're saying. Shne'emar yegia kapecha ki tochal ashrecha b'tov lach. From Psalms, you should enjoy the fruit of your labor, you should be happy, and you should prosper. So someone who is happy is someone who actually is able to enjoy what she is able to provide for herself. And also, a little bit of a different text, but very related, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar says, envy, lust, and desire for honor put a person out of this world. A little snippet into the psychology of the rabbis, who do have a sense of psychology for the rest of us, that when we are focused on another person and what they have, that does us no good and puts us out of the world. That's a vague notion. The rabbis literally could mean if lust, if desire, if we don't get a handle on the things that we want and get grounded, we're not able to function in this world. And I think the rabbis even had in mind somehow the notion of death here, putting a person not just emotionally or spiritually out of the world, but also physically out of the world. You might be saying, well, what could that possibly mean? But I think when we think of things like addiction, that when we're not able to get enough support or maintain enough moderation in our own lives, it really can put us out of this world. I'll share with you that I recently watched on Netflix a comedy special with the comedian John Mulaney, who used to be on, well, actually, I'm not sure that's true, but he's hosted Saturday Night Live, and he went through during COVID rehab program. His friends did an intervention with him, and it's a very funny and speaks to a lot of truth, I think, about addiction and how addiction literally and spiritually takes us out of this world. And what I also included here, just going back up to the sense of gratitude that helps us stay grounded in our own lives. I'm sure you've seen many, it's in the news all the time and all over popular psychology and even in more academic psychology. This is a piece by, I think, a professor of psychology, but I don't recall, you can look it up, about gratitude. And as he says at the very end here, we've studied more than 1,000 people from ages 8 to 80 and found that people who practice gratitude consistently report a host of benefits: physical, psychological, social. So a lot of timeless truths here. There's a lot more that we're going to cover, and it's going to get a little more complicated, as we'll see. But for the moment, just before we move on to another section, is there one or two reflections or questions? One or two to get some other voices into our conversation here. And if not, we'll keep going for now. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so we'll see here that the title of the next section is From Inward to Outward. I couldn't quite think of the right noun. So I just left it from an inward look, an inward glance, a focus on intrapersonal to outward. And I think there's actually a fine line and a gray area between the two of those, and you'll see that as we go along. So I'd like to ask if someone would like to read text, the first part of what I called text 5 here, just 3:1, chapter 3, Mishnah 1. That's how we denote the sections of Pirkei Avot. Would anyone like to read this section? Sarah, wonderful. Thank you for reading. So just 3:1.
Can you hear me okay?
Thank you, yeah.
Okay. Akabaya ben Mahalal said, mark well these three things, and you will not come into the power of sin. Know from where you come and where you are going, and before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning. From where do you come? From a putrid drop. And where are you going? To a place of dust, of worm, and of maggot.
Okay, and actually, Sarah, thank you. Will you read the next one too?
Before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning. Before the King of the Kings of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be the Holy One.
Okay, and we'll do one more. Thank you in advance.
Rabbi Levitas, a man of Yavna, said, be exceedingly
humble of spirit.
Of spirit, thank you. For the hope of a person is only the worm.
Okay, so you have a few texts here. Humility is a major theme throughout Pirkei Avot, and not just in Pirkei Avot, in many other texts. You might be familiar with the popular rabbinic idea, and actually it's in the Torah itself, that Moses is considered more humble than any other person on the face of the earth. And in one story in particular, in the story of Miriam and Aaron, Moses' brother and sister, speaking badly about Moses, and it's not 100% clear what's going on in that story. They say two different things about him. The one of the verses that comes just a few later says, and Moses was exceedingly humble, more humble than anyone else. In other words, why would Miriam and Aaron be speaking about Moses in a negative way? He certainly, whatever he was doing, he didn't mean any harm. And of course, you may know Moses is actually a very complex character, but nevertheless, that statement about humility lays the groundwork for many rabbinic statements about humility. And this first one here is a little bit graphic, meaning where do you come from? Where do we all come from? From a drop of semen. Where are we going? We're going into the earth to be buried. And in the end, who's keeping track of our deeds? How is there a reckoning? It's God. There's something much larger than ourselves that's keeping track of who we are. And here spelled right out, be a person of humility. Why? Because you're going to die. And sometimes I don't know how I started thinking about this, but lately I sort of stopped thinking about it a little bit, but for some reason, a month or two, I know why. I had a big birthday recently. I was thinking about our visit on this earth. And really, I found it, I don't know, again, how I landed here, but I found it pretty profound to think about, I'm just here for a short time. I'm here for a visit. And the rabbis are well aware of that. And it's something I think that's hard for us to remember on a day-to-day basis, given everything that many of us have going on in our lives and the things, the challenges, the joys, whatever they are, we sort of forget that we're just really visiting with other people at various times. Some people are here for longer, some people are here for shorter. And the rabbis, in many different ways here, say, keep your eye on the bigger picture. We're going to keep going. And now, again, moving outward further, thinking about our relationships with other people, the rabbis say in 420, Rabbi Judah the Nasi, he's considered the editor of the Mishnah, says, don't look at a container, al tistakel bekankan, great word, ella v'ma sheyeshbo, but look at what's inside it. And he goes on a little bit. There's a new container, something that looks pretty and exciting, full of old wine, of good quality wine. And there's something that might look decrepit that does not even have any new wine in it, which is a little bit of a strange sentence, but it means there's nothing in it. So really something that looks shiny and bright is not necessarily so, and could have something in it that's even of greater quality, could have old wine in it, something of greater quality. There are a few different stories in the Talmud and in rabbinic texts about not looking at the surface. And in fact, I'll just share one very briefly with you. There's a story of a rabbi who's traveling along after some studies in a Beit Midrash, in a house of Torah study. And he encounters a random person on the street, and he actually says to the person, "You are so ugly." And the person says, like, you're not insulting me, you're insulting God. God created me. And in the end, the rabbi goes to the village of the person and not only is sort of put in a position to apologize to the person, but to the whole village. It's a great story. If anybody wants it, you can email me. But here we have just a little short pithy phrase. And in Hebrew, you can even hear like the kankan, a container, is a catchy word. Don't look at the kankan, don't look at the can, the container. Look at what's inside of it. There is where you're going to find true value. So when we encounter everyone, it takes time to get to know someone. Don't only look at the way the person initially presents. And then the rabbis are taking this further. They're exploring, well, again, how do we have an even better relationship with people? It takes empathy. And this is the first text is pretty simple. The second text is a little more interesting. The first text, don't judge a fellow person until you've reached his place. We all have the tendency to be judgmental. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a saying that might have an impact on us. But the rabbis are trying to help us remind ourselves that's not really the way to go. Try and put yourself in someone else's shoes. Be empathetic. And now we have this next text, which I'll read in English. Shimon ben Elazar says, it's actually, the English translates it to the past tense, but it's actually the present tense in Hebrew, which is interesting. Oftentimes when we speak about Torah texts or rabbinic texts, we speak in the present tense as if the voices are still alive and with us today. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, do not try to appease your friend during his hour of anger. Don't comfort her at the hour while her dead still lies before her. Don't question her at the hour of her vow. Don't strive to see him in the hour of their disgrace. I'm going to take the first three statements first. So when somebody is angry, it's our tendency, or having a strong emotion, many of us want to say like, oh, it's all going to be okay, or let me shed some light on the situation for you. And the rabbis are actually saying, no. The modern notion of, I don't know how many people have heard this, sometimes this comes up in like spiritual circles, you hold space for someone. The rabbis are saying for us, no, our job is to be a listener and not try and convince someone out of their feelings. And in fact, that will allow a person to get out of a perhaps dark place. And the rabbis are very psychologically attuned to mourning, as many people here might know from the Jewish mourning customs. The rabbis are saying when somebody has just lost a loved one, we should try and comfort them, but don't go overboard. I'm adding in a little bit here. Let the person have their feelings. Just be present for the person. You might be wondering, what does this mean? Don't question a person at the hour of his vow. Interestingly enough, in the Torah and in rabbinic texts, based on the Torah. There's a lot about vows and the power of words. When we think about how rabbinic and ancient cultures were oral cultures, rather than how easy it is for us to write or type today, vows, our words, took on much more of a powerful sense than maybe we get them today. And when a person vowed, the rabbi said that they were in a rash place. They could be in a place of high emotion, and they didn't want us to necessarily try and convince a person out of making a rash vow, because they might make a more extreme vow. That's the traditional interpretation of this line. In all these situations, and in that last one, which is a little bit unrelated, but don't strive to see someone in their hour of disgrace, meaning like let that, if a person is embarrassed or having a hard time, maybe if it would embarrass them, we don't reach out necessarily. Obviously, each situation has to be judged on its own, but in this case here, the rabbis are saying the last thing we want to do is embarrass someone. You might know a very famous line from the Talmud that says that when we embarrass someone, it's actually as if we're killing them. So this emphasis on helping a person maintain their dignity is what the rabbis are speaking to here. The last piece here, I'll just mention briefly, the rabbis say who is mighty, someone who's able to control in Hebrew here, the word is yitzro, their inclination. The Hebrew phrase for an evil inclination, an instinct to do the wrong thing, is yetzer hara, an evil inclination, and yetzer hatov is the inclination to do good. So they don't spell out the full phrase here, but a person who can get control over his own desires that might lead him down a wrong path, that's a person who is considered gibur, strong. The rabbis are associating strength here with being able to keep yourself at an emotionally regulated place, rather than being a person who's physically strong. Strength is connected to emotion rather than physicality here. So all these ideas here about empathy, looking beyond the surface, humility, taking into consideration that we're here for a short time, and therefore treating other people and ourselves with the utmost respect. And this section here could have been in the first section, maintaining control, maintaining a regulated stance, but there was something about it that I thought was related to our relationships with other people. When we're grounded and regulated, we are able to more easily relate to others. So I'm gonna pause here with all these kind of tips from the rabbis, thinking about asking you to think for a moment about what we've done so far, either going back, you can sort of take a look back if you have the document open, thinking about self-care, gratitude, and also all these beginning tips from the rabbis like humility and a lack of judgmentalness, giving the benefit of the doubt. So I'll pause for one or two questions, and then we're going to keep exploring the plethora of texts here. And I hope everyone is kind of staying with me with a copious amount of material here. So I'll go ahead and pause for one or two questions. Okay. I'm going to ask Sophie S. to ask her question or share her reflections, since we haven't heard from her yet.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like the text 8 on inner self-control, the word that's evil in the brackets, I kind of see that as an addition, because the text before is seeming to say you even have to subdue your good inclinations to, want to run and fix people's problems. So
beautiful.
That's kind of what I'm getting from this group of texts. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. That's very interesting. It's a really interesting connection. I think you're right. It is an interesting thing. I didn't think that much about, I think I took this translation from a website called Sefaria, which many of you might be familiar with. And if you've been on my Jewish Learning calls, we've all probably mentioned it, many of the teachers. A great site, and the translator of Pirkei Avot is a great Talmud scholar named Josh Kolk. If you go on to Sefaria, you'll see his name written for the, I think for the whole Mishnah and its translations. And I think it is really interesting here. I think when you read the verses that follow, it does seem to, the sense of subduing one's inclination does seem to connect to a negative kind of place. But when you think about the rabbis as a whole and their own desire to see us regulating our emotions, I do think you can read this as just regular inclination. So that's an insightful point. So Sophie, thank you. And I'll also ask Dorothea to share her insight or reflection at this moment, since we haven't heard from you yet, Dorothea. Let's see, I can unmute you. Okay, 1 second, let me see if I can unmute. I can ask to unmute. Mara, I don't see you, but I don't know if you're able to unmute.
Yeah.
Dorothea. Oh, there we go. Okay, great.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you so much.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about all the conquests that were done at, at that time. And when it says, he that rules his spirit, then he that takes a city, which I interpret as conquest. So how do you about that? Because there was a lot of conquest going on in the Middle East at the time of the Torah. And it's all in the Torah, of course. Yeah.
So, but I almost heard you starting to ask a question also. Did you have kind of like a...
Yeah, I'm asking you to comment on it. Like, what is it? Why would they be condemning taking a city when in the Torah, God...
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Take that city.
Yeah, that's a great...
Don't leave anybody...
Yes, that's a great question. So listen, I would say that there are inconsistencies in the Torah and there are values in tension with each other. I'll say a couple things. I think, Dorothea, you might be also thinking specifically of the book of Joshua, in which the conquest of the Israelites of the land of Canaan is described. So one thing that I'll say that might make you and others feel a little bit better is actually we don't have evidence of that. And it seems like the Israelites were an ethnic group that kind of sprung up among the Canaanites. And they were sort of a subgroup of the Canaanites that developed their own kind of theology, much different than the surrounding pagan theology. So the conquest that we read about, we don't actually know for sure that happened. So that's one piece that when you think about the negativity and then the sense of conquering in other people, that might make some people who, if that's troublesome for you, feel a little bit better. But the other piece is something that I've heard and that I like to share also is we really need to think about Hebrew Bible, all 24 books in the Tanakh, as a library of Jewish texts. And there will certainly be, there are different voices and different approaches. And although the Hebrew Bible does consider it acceptable, at least in the storyline, for the Israelites to conquer the lands of Israel, because that was the lands that God promised to them, you can see here that this voice in Proverbs doesn't think that's such a great thing. Alternatively, I would say that maybe this voice in Proverbs is simply saying, yes, a fact of life, nations conquer other nations, people conquer land, but what's really strength, inner strength, emotional strength, spiritual strength, that's greater than physical strength that allows one to conquer. So a few possibilities there. Thank you for the question. Thank you so much. Okay. I do see a couple of hands raised, Arnold and Sarah. Sarah, I know you read for us, but I know you didn't ask a question or share a reflection, so I'm going to go ahead and call on you.
So my question goes back to the part about from where we come from. And I've heard that word translated as putrid before.
Yeah.
And it just always strikes me here. This is the beginning of life. Semen is the beginning of our life. And they are describing it in that way. It's always jolting to me. That's all.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, that's a very interesting thought.
I don't know
I
what
don't
the
know.
word
I have to give that
srucha.
some thought.
As-
Meti pasrucha. Yeah, I mean, I sort of almost took the translation for granted. I can do some searching. You can email me and I can see if I find anything on srucha. I'm trying to associate it with anything else in the Hebrew Bible that I can think of, and I can't. But I think with the sense of putrid, honestly, you know, it's really a word that focuses on a negative smell. It doesn't necessarily focus on an entity in and of itself that's negative. So I don't think they're saying necessarily here that it's not like we come from, it's not like a drop of semen is necessarily a negative thing in and of itself. They're just saying, you know, they're being a little graphic here that, okay, well, a drop of semen doesn't always smell so great. So I think that's the sense here, but not, I don't think it's anything beyond that. In terms of the word srucha, it's a great question. Thank you for pointing out the Hebrew here, samech resh ches. I would have to look up that Hebrew root and see what I find. And again, you're welcome to email me and I can look into that. It's an interesting question. Okay, so thank you so much everyone for your participation so far. As I shared with you, I'd like to keep one or two questions take one or two questions or reflections between sections. And then I'd like us to keep moving to cover all the ideas here that we can today. And hopefully those that didn't get to ask may be able to ask in a little bit. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here to some texts that get interesting in terms of thinking about really focused on our communities, not as much on the relationship between ourselves and our communities, though that could all be debated, but let's read these together. There are 4 here, and then we're going to try and start the next section too. So a very famous line here, do not separate yourself from the community, and in Hebrew, al tifrosh min hatzibur. And an interesting line that follows, do not trust in yourself until the day of your death. Va'al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom motcha. So that line might seem a little bit alarming. Like, how could we not trust in ourselves? How can we not trust our guts? Isn't that listening to our intuition? Isn't that what we're always told? I think it's true that those things, I think for we moderns are relevant. For the rabbis, I think they didn't feel that way as much as we do. And when we look at these two words together, these two lines together, the two ideas together, I would say that the rabbis could be saying, don't trust only in yourself. So that's a little bit of my drash. I don't know why they say until the day of your death. I need to think about that a little bit more. It's an interesting piece, but I think they want to sort of rhetorically emphasize here that really it's not only about us. They really want us to be part of a community. I'll share with you that I was another example of this. I was recently working with a young student on their I'm trying to think of which one. I have 2 students working on similar subjects and I can't actually remember, on their Dvar Torah, their kind of mini sermon, word of Torah for their Bar Mitzvah. And we read a Rashi, a commentary. Rashi is one of the most famous, if not the most famous, early medieval commentators on the Torah. And he says that when the Israelites complained in one of the complaint stories in the book of Numbers about a lack of food or water, they did so in a way, it's one of the food stories, I'm just remembering, which I think it's in Parshat Beha'alotza in Numbers 12, if I'm not mistaken. Again, you're welcome to email me. But Rashi says that when the Israelites did complain about their lack of food, they didn't like the manna that God sent down from the heavens, says the story in the book of Exodus. They didn't like that. And the story says that they missed the fish and the lemons, the fish and the melons and the cucumbers and the garlic and the leeks. That's what they missed in the land of Egypt when they were slaves. And Rashi says that it's not so much what they said, even though that missing the food in Egypt is kind of confusing and confounding since they were slaves in Egypt, but the focus of Rashi is on when they complained. In the Hebrew Bible, the word mit onanim is used. And Rashi says it's a word in other contexts that means that they didn't really care about making things better for the community at large. They separated themselves from the community and wanted to rebel. So instead of complaining and separating themselves, the Israelites, in complaining about the food, could have said, what can we do as a community? As my student said, can we work with our leaders? How can we better rely on ourselves? And instead, they just said, forget it. We're separating ourselves from everyone, those of us that are rebelling, and we're complaining in a way that is just going to make people angry. And so again, that's echoed here, that we should not separate ourselves from community. We should find ways to connect and give back and be part of community, and not only trust in ourselves until the day of our death. I will add here one more interesting piece, that one traditional example that's given for not trusting in yourself and for making the mistake of trusting yourself is King Solomon, because in the book of Deuteronomy, it specifically says that a king, an Israelite king, should not have too many wives, too many horses, too many riches, too much silver. And Solomon had a lot of wives. And the books of the prophets tell us that Solomon had so many wives who worshiped other gods, and they persuaded Solomon to worship other gods. And Solomon was in fact punished for that, because he was the last king of the unified Israelite kingdom. And after that, there was a northern kingdom of Israel and a southern kingdom of Judah. And that was his punishment, even though it was a punishment for future generations. That was, he relied too much on himself. He decided, no, I can have, and Solomon was also very wealthy. We can, it's okay for me. Even though Deuteronomy says that, it's okay for me. So that the rabbis are saying here, no, in a very traditional way, we shouldn't necessarily take ourselves out of community norms. I'm not saying I necessarily fully agree with that here, but I will add the piece about the sort of modern interpretation of not only trusting in ourselves, keeping connected with the community. So moving on, there's also, speaking of biblical characters, the rabbis say that Aaron, Moses' brother, is someone who pursued peace. And this is a famous phrase in Hebrew, which I'll also read in English. Aaron loved peace, ohev shalom, verodef shalom. He pursued, he chased after peace, ohev et habriot, and he loved humankind. And so drawing them close to Torah, as the rabbis say, we should be the same as Aaron. We should do, our actions should be based in a sense of peacemaking and a sense of love and care for other people. And sort of a very basic rule, but something that is really hard to do on a regular basis. Rabbi, in Hebrew, it's Matya. Here it looks like Matthiah. Rabbi Matya, Rabbi Matthiah ben Harash says, when you meet people, be the first to extend a greeting. Havei makdim bishlom kol adam. We can all kind of walk through the world, I think, and sometimes say, oh, why doesn't that person say hi to me? Well, the rabbis are saying, don't go there. Just say hi. Be the first person to say hi. Rabbi Yishmael says, and these are on a little bit of a different note, but be speedy to obey a superior, be dignified before the young, and receive every man, every person happily. V'havei v'kabel et kol adam b'simcha. So greet every person with joy. Something, again, that I think is often as we walk through the world and we pick up on other things that people might be, different kinds of energy and vibes that we're getting from another person. And many of us all the time can, or at different times can be sensitive to those things. The rabbis are saying, just be the first, just do it, be the first. It's a great reminder, I think, when we do get into that place. Oh, right, we can say, the ancient sages reminded me to greet people cheerfully and to be the first to have a greeting. I'm gonna maybe push myself to try that. At least that's something that I've reminded myself of in the past. These two things here, which we're not totally focused on, but I'll mention, of course, the rabbis do have a sense of hierarchy, especially in rabbinic culture, where students learn from rabbis. And this goes back a little bit to what Dorothea said earlier. There are things that we might find inconsistent or like, on the one hand, in reading all these texts, there's sort of, you might be picking up on, there's a sense of egalitarianism between people, of treating yourself, treating others, treating everyone as much as possible with respect. And on the other hand, the rabbis say we should be obeying a superior. There's a little bit of a tension, but that was certainly part of rabbinic culture. And be dignified before the young, model what it means to be a mensch, to be a person of ethics and decency before young people. And another cornerstone in positive behavior, tshuva, which we think about repentance more so in connection with the high holidays. But here we see the rabbis say sort of an extreme statement that makes us think about tshuva as a value to try and live up to all the time. Rabbi Jacob used to say, I have it in parentheses here, more precious is 1 hour of repentance and good deeds in this world than all the life in the world to come. We'll see the next statement is a little bit different, but the rabbis are saying in the world to come, which the rabbis definitely believed in, though have differing perspectives on, in the world to come, that's a great place to go when we're no longer in this world, but so precious is repentance and doing the right thing that it's better than any time we get in the world to come. And it's very, you might think here, how Jewish of the rabbis to really be focused on this world and our actions in this world. And certainly I can't disagree with that. Very Jewish to be very present in this world. In the Hebrew Bible, for the most part, there is no Olam Haba, there is no afterworld for the most part. In the Torah itself, in the 5 books of the Torah, there really isn't a notion of a world to come. The rabbis developed that notion and here say, it's a great place, but doing the right thing and doing ma'asim tovim, good deeds, making a change when needed in our lives, making a change when we do something wrong, that's how we should walk through the world. I'm actually just gonna skip over that last part. I'll invite you to read it on your own. And I'm gonna move forward with a few additional texts just because of time, and I wanna end with a couple of specific ideas. So I wanna point out here the emphasis that the rabbis placed on action, meaning they compare wisdom and action. They create a tension between wisdom and action to a tree. And they say that, I'm not gonna read this text, just summarize it for you. The best possible image that we could have of a tree is one where its branches are full of good deeds, where there's a plethora of good deeds that we're doing, and there's wisdom that is our grounding in roots. The opposite, the converse of having a ton of wisdom, but not so many good deeds at the root of who we are, the rabbis aren't a fan of that. They want us to focus on doing. And again, a very Jewish message to push ourselves to do as much good as we can. I'm gonna keep going here. In this next text, also, I'm gonna not read it, but share that the rabbis say, they compare a bunch of things, and essentially they're saying these things have to be hand in hand. Torah and derech eretz. Learning Torah, teaching Torah, living a life of Torah from more so a ritual perspective has to go hand in hand with ethical conduct. Wisdom, the wisdom we get from life experience, also the rabbis are suggesting has to go hand in hand with, I would say from a more modern interpretive place, spirituality, and continuing along. The rabbis say knowledge is great, but being able to process that knowledge, understanding or insight is what they want us to have. So all these things, wisdom, insight, action, that forms the basis of who the rabbis were and the values that they wanted us to have. We're getting to the last part here. The rabbis, for the most part, focus on ourselves, working on ourselves, being part of a community, but they also say, let's also keep in mind that reputation is important. So there's crowns, there's things that we could have that would mark us as accomplished or rewarded, like a crown of Torah or a crown of priesthood or a crown of royalty, but a crown of a good name, in Hebrew, Keter or Keter Shem Tov, supersedes them all. Ole al gabehen. And I also want to share with you the next text aloud. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa used to say, one with whom men are pleased, God is pleased. Anyone from whom men are displeased, God is displeased. There's this notion that our effect on other people is also our effect on God. So when we cheat or lie or steal and have a negative effect on other people, no matter who those people are, the rabbis are saying here, that's not the way to go. That also has an effect on God. In Judaism, we often refer to the mitzvot, the commandments or sacred responsibilities, in two categories, between people and between God. Bein Adam l'chaveiro in Hebrew, between people, and Bein Adam l'makom, between a person and God. And the rabbis are actually saying here, it's one and the same. It's all one and the same. Our effect on others is also our effect on a higher power. And two last texts that I think we're gonna, as we near the end here, Rabbi Jacob said, the world is like a vestibule, a prose door in Hebrew, before the world to come. Prepare yourself in this vestibule so that you may enter the banqueting hall, the tarkalin, a borrowed word. I don't know from what language, but it's definitely not originally Hebrew. It may be a Greek borrowed word, common in the Mishnah. So the rabbis say here that, again, the world to come is great, but there's a lot you have to do to prepare for it. If you want to get to the world to come, behave appropriately here. And what do they mean by that? They mean all the different kinds of things that we've discussed so far. And this is finally a great text to end on, I think. Some of you might have heard this one before. In a place where there are no people, b'makom she'ein anashim, hishtadel lihiot ish. Strive to be a person. They mean strive to be a person of decency. So if you're finding you're in a place that behavior isn't really up to the standards that you think it should be, it doesn't actually mean that we should lower ourselves. You might remember when Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. You might not agree with her politics, but this is what she's saying. This is what the rabbis are saying. When in a place of low ethical standards, you be that person to model the standards. The rabbis are placing a pretty high burden on each of us to always be thinking about the highest possible ethical standards. So I'm actually not going to read the other texts because I just flew through a whole bunch of things and I don't want to fly through additional material. But I want us to pause at this moment and think about that ending line, the way that we're ending today, really reaching inward and trying to be a person of decency, a mensch, even though we might be in a place that doesn't exhibit the qualities that we know to be true and to be right. And think about all the things that we covered so far. And at 1:56, I want to pause and take a couple of questions or reflections and then wrap things up. So the Zoom floor is open for a question and or reflection. And I see one hand raised. I want to make sure I pronounce this name correctly. Nassim, I don't know if that's the last name.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's the name. So thank you very much. I wonder when they say, hello from France. I wonder when they say be part of a community, who do they consider community? Because what I always fear about community is, I mean, it leads to togetherness, but also to, separation from whomever you don't consider your community. So how do we handle this?
That's a great insight, a great question. I think for the rabbis, scholars used to think that the rabbis were kind of Jewish leaders right from the get-go, meaning when the rabbis developed as a group of people after the destruction of the Second Temple, so after 70 CE, the conventional academic wisdom used to be that the rabbis spoke to, had an impact on others. Generally, the scholarship has changed, and the rabbis likely did not really have an effect on other Jews until at least the 8th or 9th century, which is fascinating. And that could be a whole other class. So the rabbis were really talking to themselves, this group, the scholarly, academic, intellectual elite. And going back to our first question today, in northern Roman Palestine, so in the lands of Israel in the north, that's where the rabbis kind of sprang up. In the Galilee, they were talking to themselves. You're raising also a question of the tension between community and the individual. Like, how do we avoid, when we appreciate, let's say, the community we're automatically leaving out other people? It's a fascinating question. I guess I would say you really have to, take the values that we're reading in moderation. And I would say, you seem like a lovely person, trust your gut and try and be as inclusive as possible. Well, also, I think we all deserve and we all should appreciate a sense of belonging in our own communities. But as you said, the idea of being welcoming and radically welcoming is actually also very much a Jewish idea. For another class, which I actually taught on before Passover, the idea of kindness and treating a stranger with the utmost dignity. So holding multiple Jewish values and embracing that there are often values in tension with each other, and deciding for yourself in each situation what we can, how to proceed, which value makes the most sense in the moment is our job as moderns and as people. So we do have to end. It's 1:59, and I really am committed to ending on time. I do want to invite people who did not, you are welcome to email me. And again, just give me a few days to get back to you. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating, for reading, for thinking with me today about this plethora of values. And I invite you to really sit with it and go through the material again, if you can, to really see how the values fit together, how they're grouped into different categories here. And I certainly invite you to take them in and build on them in your own life and your own behavior as much as possible. So I hope to see many people again in 2 weeks, May 16th at the same time.